Tuesdays, hosted by the Almond Board of California. As some of you may know, this year ABC will be mixing in technical and regulatory concerns and issues going on in the industry into this year's webinar series. So along with that great agronomic information developed by our research and innovation team, you will also have some of the trade and logistics issues that's affecting the industry from our global technical and regulatory affairs team. And that's where we begin today. ABC's GTRA team is having their first webinar on the transportation survey that was conducted by ABC and an update on the process of the China facility registration that went into effect January 1st. Before we get to the information today, we will begin with some housekeeping. Everybody on this call, besides the presenters, are muted. We do have time for questions and answers, hopefully, at the end of every speaker session. And the best way to do that is to click on the chat icon. If you're unfamiliar with Teams, you can click on the chat icon here and type your question into the chat. It's the easiest way to do so for us to ask the questions after the speaker is done talking. You can also click on the emoji icon here and raise your hand, and then I can unmute you after everyone is done to ask your question. But again, the easiest way to ask your question is probably in the chat. With that being complete, I will turn this over to Brock, who will start today's session and talk about the transportation survey that was conducted by ABC. Brock, you can start sharing and I will stop.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taylor. Just want to confirm that you are able to see my screen right now, my PowerPoint here.
That is correct.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Taylor. And as Taylor said, I'm Brock Densel. I'm the Senior Analyst for Government Affairs here at the Almond Board. I want to first of all thank everybody for joining us this morning to hear about this very critical issue that's facing the industry right now, being the ag shipping delays that we've been seeing across the industry. And it's vitally important, especially now. We know that about 70% of all almonds are exported. Last year, that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.5 billion worth of almonds. So any sort of hiccup in this is going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry. And so, again, just thank you for joining us today. ABC has been, continually monitoring this issue and any developments that come out. And as part of that monitoring process, we put a survey into the field with our handlers to gain a little bit more insight as to sort of where the economic impacts are being felt most acutely. Before we sort of dive into the survey, I do just want to give a little bit of background on what the issues are that we're facing here and sort of how a lot of these things came to be. We saw that record consumer goods imports coming in from Asia, combined with a shortage of chassis and drivers, caused a backlog of high-value products entering the ports, particularly ports of LA, Long Beach, but this was happening largely all across the United States as well. You have weight limits on trucks and box rules, which are commercial relationships between carriers and equipment manufacturers or equipment providers that mandate which chassis shippers must use. So you have those couple of things further exacerbating the shortages of chassis and drivers and bringing both imports and exports to a little bit of a crawl. Due to the backlog and the record freight rates from Asia to the United States, there's a premium on quickly returning empty containers back to Asia so that they can bring those high-value products back to the United States. And as a result, carriers, particularly those normally servicing both LA, Long Beach, and Oakland, have reduced service to Oakland, which limits the space available for almond exports. We've noticed that ships that have called on Oakland do so with a lack of what I call schedule integrity. we've seen short receiving windows and changing receiving dates and all of that, those types of things. And that's because they're very eager to return these empty containers back to their Asian origin points. The lack of containers, chassis, and drivers, these unreliable carrier practices, has resulted in exporters receiving only a fraction of the necessary bookings they need to meet global demand, and also just making it incredibly difficult to move product throughout the system. And the shipping delays are then backing up product movement to the handler level. Handlers are short on storage space. They're spending more time just trying to get single shipments out, spending additional resources on measures to ensure product quality and safety, and suffering from late payments. As these payments or as the shipments are delayed, also, in most cases, the payments for receiving those shipments are also similarly delayed. Um, then you have sort of increased inventory and more potential almond acreage coming online, probably negatively affecting prices and causing greater concern for future storage ability. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as we move forward here. That there are issues both globally at the federal, state, and local levels that all contributed in some form or fashion to what we're currently seeing. And because of that kind of wide breadth of where the issues lie, it's going to be hard to see a single solution that's going to solve this problem overnight. There are certainly steps and measures that we can take or that others can take at the federal, state level to help alleviate these shortages in this delay. But it's hard to see a single solution kind of solving everything. I also want to just point out that the issues that we're facing in this sort of export delays arena are rapidly changing. We had this survey in the field the final week in January and went through sort of the middle of February collecting results. And even just in the few weeks since then, we've seen additional new issues arise. And because of that, I do just want to point out that this is sort of an iterative process. ABC had a poll or a survey last year as well, sort of smaller on a less focused scale, but also went out with a survey to understand some of these concerns. And we're going to be continuing to monitor developments in this space, potentially even with some additional surveys to get some increasingly better information. And just like I said, it's going to be an iterative process here. I want to talk a little bit about how we were able to do this and sort of the steps that we took here. I do just want to point out that this isn't, a scientific survey, that you see out of a university or anything like that. But rather it's a survey tool that allows us to get sort of a quick snapshot as to what's going on in the industry. I will just say that I believe we have a great deal of accuracy in these numbers. We had very good handler response. I believe we had about 38% of all pounds of almonds exported represented in this survey through responses. So we have a very good sample size here. And, even despite it not being, a truly scientific survey, I feel like our numbers here are pretty accurate as to what's going on across the industry. We did this survey almost entirely online. We sent it to all of the handlers asking for responses. In addition, ABC staff conducted follow-up interviews with 6 handlers located throughout the Central Valley in order to get a better understanding of sort of maybe the day-to-day problems, sort of get a better understanding of the real on-the-ground consequences of these shipping delays, as well as see if there was anything that perhaps our survey had left out. As you can see, it was a fairly comprehensive survey. Respondents could have been asked up to 40 questions. That doesn't mean anybody actually was asked 40 questions. There's a lot of if yes, then please explain type of things, but a total of potentially 40 questions, and that was spread out across 8 issue categories. And we asked a number of questions that range from asking respondents to provide us with specific numbers on costs to more open-ended questions about concerns for the upcoming year. We then took that data back here at the Almond Board, consolidated it. We were able to extrapolate that 38% out and do that in a way that maintained and safeguarded any proprietary data or information that was gathered throughout this process. So what is it that we learned? Well, I would say that we kind of gained a good deal amount of insight on really 5 major categories here, plus some just general observations about what's going on at the handler level here. And that is shipping costs, administrative costs, the food safety and quality precautions, detention and demurrage fees, and potential warehousing shortages. So without further ado, let's kind of dive in here to the first section here, which I've got is shipping costs. And I think that this is probably one of the most apparent impacts and well-reported impacts of the delays, just how much it takes to get a product to its destination market. What is that real cost? And we sought to identify this information through looking at changes from the previous calendar year for both container fees and what I'm calling transit costs, which is really just the cost to get the goods, the product to the port, to the preferred port, as I believe the way we worded it in the survey. Additionally, we tried to identify any differences based on destination market. Now, I do want to just kind of point out here that shipping mechanisms and contract terms vary from company to company, and this kind of results in a discrepancy as to who's actually tracking these costs, whether it's at the handler level or the buyer level. And so that sort of affects, how much information we were able to collect throughout this process. But we will say that every single respondent that tracked their own container fees reported an increase in those container fees. And in fact, we found that on average, this increase was 54% per container of almonds being exported. So 54% year over year increase in the container fees that we're seeing. We also found that there wasn't a significant difference based on percent increase based on major destination market. We kind of just broke out EU and Asia in general there. And as you see, the EU the EU rose 54% and Asia rose 53%. So not a real significant difference there. But, on the other side of things, one of the largest percent increases year over year that we found, probably as a result of the shortage of chassis, truck drivers, and increased fuel costs, is that transportation to the preferred port. And we saw that at an average increase of 61%. So that is a very significant increase just to get the product to the port. So now, sort of as we move on here to administrative costs, the shipping costs, these are things that were a little bit more well-known, a little bit more well reported on, but we found that there are a number of additional costs that have been really begin to rack up for handlers, and not the least of which would be administrative costs. Just nearly all respondents that we either got online or through the in-person interviews reported a marked increase in the administration time and cost associated with getting containers shipped. Some respondents we talked to had to bring in additional help, hiring for newly created positions, particularly in their logistics department. We talked to some who, while they didn't bring in additional help, are just working, 18 hours a day almost in some cases in order to just get the product that they can shipped out of the warehouse and into the destination market. And I do just want to point out that our questions in this space were kind of narrowly focused on administrative time and costs associated with sort of the logistics personnel. It doesn't take into account any sort of productivity losses due to warehousing or lack of schedule integrity issues created by the carrier. So that's sort of the realm that we were looking at here. And, to me, this was really one of the biggest insight areas where overall we saw an increase of 44% in administrative costs per container. That is a very large increase it just in a single year. And additionally, we found that staff time spent per consignment increased by nearly 9 hours. That means it now takes just over an entire extra workday just to be able to complete the paperwork for a single shipment. So these logistics departments across the industry have really taken a center stage in the quest to move as much product as quickly as possible. Another one of the other costs that we've found was really racking up at the handler level are those costs associated with ensuring product quality and safety. And we found that 93% of our respondents indicated that due to delays, they were forced to take additional preventative measures, such as increased inventory controls and fumigation. Now, I will say that the limitations of the survey didn't allow us to capture an exact dollar amount for any industry. And while the cost associated with these measures varies quite a bit, I think that what we saw was across the industry, these costs are likely to be greater than sort of what we've seen in the carrier-imposed detention and demurrage fees, which has really seen a lot of publicity over the course of the last year here. But these are very significant costs that are really starting to rack up, across the industry here. And sort of moving on and speaking about detention and demurrage fees. So detention fees are applied to storage and handling of containers while in the customer's care outside the port. And then demurrage fees are charged for laden containers while in the care of the carrier at the port, typically at the port. And I will just say that handlers transport almonds to the port using various trucking arrangement structures. That, sort of along with distance to the port they're shipping through, impacts how much and who is responsible for ultimately tracking and contesting these detention and demurrage fees. There's kind of a wide swath across the industry and how those arrangements are made. But even still, there's been a noticeable and significant jump in these fees. Over the course of the past year, more of these fees have been levied against the industry. And in most cases, this is due to, as I said, as I call it, sort of the lack of schedule integrity. We see, you'll get product to the port, and then the carrier will change their receiving window or change their schedule around, and the product is just left to sit there at the port, has to be stored somewhere. And as a result, those particularly demurrage fees begin to rack up. And again, these are contestable back to most of the carriers, but the actual responsibility for that varies from company to company. Of those that do track and dispute these fees, every single one of them in our survey reported an increase in instances of these fees being applied. And furthermore, among those that do track their detention and demurrage fees, we found the range of year-over-year increase in the amount paid for these fees it ranged anywhere from 15 to a 200% increase in just a single year. Now, harkening back to my earlier points about quality and safety measures, I think that obviously the respondent who would have a 200% increase probably is feeling this more than they would the quality and safety measures. And on the other side of the equation, the handler that said 15% probably is seeing a greater increase in the quality and safety measures as well. So now I want to talk about something that we got insight in, although not necessarily any great numbers that I have that I'm able to share with you here, but that is warehousing shortages that are currently ongoing and then have the potential to get even worse as we look ahead here. You had record carry-in, another large crop, backed up supply from the ports, and an inability to plan ahead due to that lack of carrier schedule integrity, all leads to sort of an unanticipated yet critical issue for many handlers, and that is the lack of warehousing space. Many of the handlers we spoke to and most of the survey respondents indicated that they've had to either build or rent additional space. And while some had started building additional space prior to the delays taking their toll and were kind of, prepared at just the right time to deal with some of these issues, others were left with little other option but to rent warehouse space at unfavorable rental rates or build new facilities sort of on the fly to accommodate an increase in this increase in supply that's been backed up. One of the major things that we heard both in our interviews as well as in the online survey portion, sort of the open comment period, was that the lack of survey or the lack of warehousing space really is. I mean, there are a couple of different variations of it, right? Obviously, some places just don't have room for even the bulk product. But the majority of the places that we've talked to and respondents that we got back, we found that consignments that get packed and readied for shipment, they just take up so much more warehouse space while they just wait to be moved. And when you have this lack of schedule integrity by the carriers, not knowing exactly when you're going to be able to get that load out, greatly affects how much warehousing space you have on any given day. And this congestion directly affects the handler's abilities to react quickly to rapid shifts and compacted carrier receiving windows. We've also seen similar issues being reported where, due to the driver and chassis shortages and those carrier imposed box rules and truck weight limits, we also see where all of a sudden a handler has to now kind of quickly change the amount that they ship, obviously less because everything's been inspected and all of that, but limit the amount that they were planning on shipping in order to meet all of these various box rules and weight limits and all of that sort of thing. And so in those instances, it just follows up and creates even greater warehousing shortages. So sort of from the numbers portion, what are some of the key takeaways that we've seen here? Shipping costs in 2021 rose 50%, over 50% from the previous year. We've got transportation uncertainties, delays, and prices are all taking their toll on the exporters. Detention and demurrage fees have increased significantly, with respondents reporting anywhere between 15 and 20% increases in the amount paid. Administrative costs have risen 44% per container, and each consignment is now taking over an entire workday worth of staff hours to complete. Delays are putting pressure on prices, making it difficult to deal with large carryover and earlier contracts. And sort of the top line number here is, according to a recent UC Davis study, the value of California's containerized exports fell by $2.1 billion from May to September of 2021. And while we're unable to sort of provide a top line number such as that out of this survey, certainly the results that we found over the course of conducting this survey are in line with that report. So what are some of the just general observations and general takeaways here? The export delay crisis has continued to morph and provide new issues for exporters and handlers to address. But the industries continue to adapt alongside that and find novel solutions to unprecedented problems and still get as much product out of the country as possible. The lack of schedule integrity trickles down to affect the way exporters think about everything from sales strategies to contract structures to warehousing needs. So this is really a problem that is felt throughout the industry. And I'll get to another point here that just kind of hammers that home in a moment. We found that some buyers have been taking advantage of the delays and falling prices to renegotiate contracts at lower prices or cancel them altogether. Now, while this survey was in the field, we didn't have too many instances reported of just flat out canceled contracts. There were some here and there, but just in the last few weeks, as we were after we had finished gathering this data and as we were starting to analyze it, we did start hearing about some developments and more instances of canceled contracts being canceled altogether. So unfortunately, not good news there. And the final aspect of the delays is a cash flow, and particularly a cash flow making its way down to the growers. With shipments, particularly what are called transshipments, so shipping to one port, particularly an Asian port, and then that port taking it on further to the destination port, taking months and months, whereas previously they were taking weeks, or taking 4 months, 6 months, whereas previously they would take 2. The payments for the product is similarly delayed in that fashion. And this lack of cash flow making its way down to the growers may have significant implications in the months and years to come. So as we kind of move forward, what are the current events? What's sort of happening out there on the ground right now? And we have seen some services return to Oakland. There's still not enough available space, empty containers, or carrier desire to provide these containers to meet global demand. So we're still continuing, even though we do have some service back, particularly to the Port of Oakland. These delays are still continuing, and the amount of product getting out just isn't quite enough to, well, not quite enough, isn't enough to meet global demand here. Additionally, the lack of schedule integrity combined with that desire to quickly return containers has led to outrageously short windows to receive products. Carriers, we've heard about receiving windows for carriers only taking products for 4 hours in some instances, which is just not enough time to realistically get product, especially in a congested port, get product alongside and loaded onto the ship. So lots of those problems are still persisting. Now, a little bit of good news: the Port of Oakland and USDA and GoBiz have a collaboration where they have a 25-acre yard where exporters will be able to pick up empties for their product. Now, obviously, this doesn't take care of product containers that are laden, but this is certainly a nice step in order to, it's a good step in the right direction, and certainly something that's going to help ease some of the congestion at the port level. And while, as I said in the beginning, we're not going to see any sort of, I don't know that there's a silver bullet solution to this. Certainly, every step we take in the right direction is a step that gets more and more product to where it needs to go, and cash flow flowing through the system. So while not maybe what everybody's hoping for, still a significant and important step in the right direction. Additionally, the Federal Maritime Commission has recently put out a comment period where they're looking at potentially taking action on detention and demurrage fees, really looking at the way that these fees are applied, and making sure that carriers have some sort of integrity with the way the process is being applied right now. One of the things I think we'll see out of this is potentially the need to justify with greater evidence um, why these fees are being levied in any particular instance. And I do want to say that while sort of the Almond Board status as a federal marketing order precludes us from taking any sort of action on many of these fronts, we do have continued engagement with the Almond Alliance, as well as the Ag Transportation Coalition, AgTC, and we're providing them with any of the updates that we hear on the ground, as well as these survey results as well. So that is all I have for now. Thank you all for joining this morning. And I'd be willing to and happy to take your questions. Taylor, if you want to maybe just go back to sharing your screen so that way I can kind of follow along in the chat a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few minutes here for questions. If anybody has some, I do not see anybody in the chat with a question yet, but you can put your questions into the chat, and we will try to answer them as we go. So we'll give it a couple minutes here if anybody has any questions. And I do not see any takers on the questions, so we will move right along. Abby, if you are ready to go, I will stop sharing and we will switch over to you.
Sounds good.
Go ahead.
Okay, does everybody see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. All right. So, okay, there we go. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Abhi Kulkarni. I am the Principal Technical and Trade Issues, part of Almond Board's Global Technical and Regulatory Affairs team, GTRA, that monitors regulations that impact our industry around the world. So today I'm going to talk about China's Decree 248. So after that excellent presentation by Brock, we'll switch focus from our shores to China. Just kind of an illustration of what some of the issues our industry faces in our export markets and the behind the scene works that ABC staff does in terms of keeping the industry informed and assisting in compliance. I don't have very many slides, just a couple of slides, so I'm going to move to the next one. So let me quickly give you a background on China's Decree 248. It's also known as the Overseas Facility Registration. So last year, China announced that any foreign food facility that exports products to China needs to be registered with the Chinese Customs Administration, which is called GACC. Now, that's fine because a lot of countries have such requirements. But typically in those cases, a handler or an exporter is able to register themselves directly with that country or have their importer or broker do the registration. So typically in this case, China did something different. They divided the products into two categories, in high risk and low risk. And unfortunately for us, they put all raw nuts and seeds in the high risk category. Now, what their rationale was, we don't know because there hasn't really been any outbreaks or any issues to do with raw nuts either here or in China, touch wood. But regardless, they put us in high risk category, and the implication for that was any product in high risk category could not register directly with GACC. They had to first go through their national authority. So in this case, it happens to be FDA for US. So you can imagine the work needed to have, because there's thousands of companies exporting product to China that fall into those category. So FDA had to devote a chunk of time to just kind of start gathering this information together. And so the process was almond handlers had to first register with FDA through the export listing module or ELM. And there was a deadline of December 17 that FDA had set. And then FDA was going to take that information, provide to China, who then was going to put it into the registration database. And thankfully, we have on our staff Keith Schneller. He's not here on the presentation today. He's enjoying a well-earned vacation. But Keith worked in China for many, many years. And so we were able to leverage his contacts. And so Keith was on the phone with China, on the phone with FDA, working with our handlers and basically guiding them through this process at every step. And so the top line update was most of our handlers that ship raw, in-shell, or shelled almonds were able to meet that deadline of December 17. There's just a few now that are still that had not registered yet. And looking at the GACC's online list where they published who had registered so far, we see most of our handlers have made it to that list. Moving forward from January 1st, GACC or China mandated that any handler shipping to China will need the facility establishment identifier, the registration number that was issued by FDA on the packaging. So when you're shipping to China, and then there is a 14-digit approval number that China generated that needs to be provided to customs, Chinese customs, for clearing the shipment. So that's something that handlers need to be mindful of. FDA confirmed that it has also sent a second tranche of list of processors, and this should include some of the almond handlers that didn't make the first list. And as of yesterday, when I checked, they still had not updated that list. So we'll keep checking with both FDA and GACC to make sure that the remaining handlers are also in that list. And once the handlers are in the list, you will receive a login and password from the Chinese authorities, and then you can go into the database, make sure that all the details are correct, make any changes, and there are some data that you have to upload in that database in terms of like product lists and basic flow chart and pictures of the products and so on. And our handlers will have until June of 2023 to do that once they're in the list. And as far as the handlers that do not ship raw, so they ship processed product like roasted almonds or almond paste, meal, almond milk concerned, they can self-register directly in that same portal, and then they will receive that 14-digit number that they will need for shipping to China. Another thing we learned through an experience of one of the industry member was, and this was not published anywhere either by China or FDA, and I'm going to move to the next slide here, was that there's another code called CIQ quarantine code that handlers need to provide to their importers. And that's also needed for clearing customs. And up there on the slide, you will see the three categories for the in-shell, shelled, and for processed almonds. So for in-shell is $9.99, for shelled is $101, and for further processing or processed almonds is 103. So you need to provide these codes to your importer as well, in addition to that 14-digit GACC number. So that's kind of the update on the China facility registration requirement. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been very fortunate to have Keith on our team, and he worked diligently behind the scenes to make sure that our handlers do not miss the deadlines, because talking with some of the other industry members in other industries, they were caught unaware of a lot of these requirements, and so they didn't meet the deadline. And I think this just goes to illustrate the importance of the work that the GTRA team does behind the scenes in terms of monitoring all these regulations that come up in our different export markets, making sure that all the industry members are updated of what's needed before they ship to these products. And then if there's any issues when the product arrives, we work with foreign ag service offices in those respective markets to make sure that the shipments are released. So with that, that's all I had, unless there are any questions. Thank you. Over to you, Taylor, again.
Thanks, Abby. And yeah, we will continue to take questions here as we do have some time. We do have a question in the chat that goes back to Brock. Brock, the question is, so in a nutshell, pun intended, the price decrease in almonds and nuts in general is a backlog of supply, the increase in logistics costs, and lack of movement in product?
So thank you very much for that question. I think that it's dangerous to attribute any specific the price drop to any specific factor. I think that's probably likely a combination of a number of different things. And so I don't even know that I would necessarily be able to put a percent on, sort of what the factors are in this. But it's certainly something that we're keeping our eye on, and I think that it's safe to say that it would be a contributing factor in the prices.
Very good. Again, we do have a few more minutes for questions. You can type your questions into the chat. In the meantime, we will talk about our next Training Tuesday that will be coming up. We are planning on doing Training Tuesdays every first and third Tuesday of the month, hopefully through July, even into August, as we do have one scheduled for August. You can visit almonds.com/events for more information. They will be added to our calendar with the information you need. And the next Training Tuesday will be March 15th, 2 weeks from today. And we'll be talking about irrigation system maintenance to keep the efficiency of your system running as good as possible. So again, mark your calendars for March 15th for the next Training Tuesday. And it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again to everybody. And the GTRA team is always available. If you have questions, you can email us at the Almond Board. You can find more at almonds.com.